The splash was what caught his attention first, followed by the desperate screams that sent chills down his spine. Blake Walters had been enjoying a quiet afternoon by Lake Serenity, a rare moment of solitude away from the demands of his shipping empire, when chaos erupted. Without hesitation, Blake kicked off his handmade Italian loafers and dove into the frigid water. His designer suit, worth more than what most people earned in a month, clung to his body as he swam toward the thrashing child. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, his powerful strokes cutting through the water with precision. "Hold on," he shouted as he reached the little girl, no more than 4 years old, her terrified eyes wide as she fought to keep her head above water. Blake secured his arm around her tiny frame and began swimming back toward the shore. The child clung to him, coughing and sputtering water. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you," he soothed, his voice steady despite his racing heart. As they neared the shore, Blake could see a woman running toward them, her face a mask of panic and fear. Her honey blonde hair whipped around her face, and even from this distance he could see the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Lucy," she cried out, wading into the water to meet them. Blake handed the little girl over to her mother, who immediately wrapped her in a tight embrace, rocking back and forth as she checked her daughter for injuries. "Lucy, baby, are you okay? What were you thinking?" The woman's voice broke as she pushed wet hair from the child's face. Blake stood dripping in the shallow water, catching his breath as he watched the emotional reunion. The woman looked up at him, her green eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't been here." "I'm just glad I was," Blake replied, suddenly aware of his soaking wet appearance. He ran a hand through his dark hair, pushing it back from his forehead. "I'm Amelia Barrett," she said, extending her hand while still holding her daughter close, "and this little water bug is Lucy." Blake took her hand, noticing how soft it felt against his palm. "Blake Walters, nice to meet you, though I wish the circumstances were different." Amelia's eyes widened slightly at his name, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. Blake was used to this reaction. As the owner of Walters Maritime, one of the largest shipping companies in the country, his face frequently appeared in business magazines and news segments. "You saved my daughter's life, Mr. Walters," Amelia said, her voice steadier now. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Please call me Blake, and no repayment necessary." He glanced down at his ruined suit and chuckled, "Though I might need to find some dry clothes." Amelia smiled, and for a moment, Blake forgot about his wet clothes and the chill setting in. Her smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. "We live just up the hill," she said, gesturing toward a modest cottage overlooking the lake. "I can at least offer you some dry clothes and a hot cup of coffee." Blake hesitated. He had meetings to attend, calls to make. His assistant would be frantically trying to reach him. But something about Amelia's warm invitation and the way Lucy was now looking at him with big, curious eyes made him nod. "That would be great, thank you." They walked together up the gravel path leading to Amelia's cottage. Blake couldn't help but notice how different this setting was from his usual environment's board rooms, luxury hotels, his penthouse overlooking the city. There was something refreshingly simple about the cottage with its weathered blue shutters and wooden porch swing. Inside, the home was warm and lived in, with children's books stacked on coffee tables and colorful artwork adorning the refrigerator. It smelled like cinnamon and something freshly baked. "The bathroom's down the hall," Amelia said, pointing. "I'll find you something to wear." "My brother leaves clothes here sometimes when he visits." While Blake changed, Amelia got Lucy into dry clothes and wrapped her in a fluffy blanket on the couch. When Blake emerged wearing borrowed jeans and a flannel shirt that was slightly too small for his broad shoulders, Amelia was in the kitchen pouring coffee. "It fits." "Mostly," Blake said with a laugh, tugging at the tight sleeves. Amelia turned and almost dropped the mug she was holding. The flannel shirt stretched across his chest in a way that highlighted his athletic build, so different from her brother's leaner frame. She quickly recovered and handed him a steaming mug. "Thank you again," she said, leaning against the counter. "Lucy slipped away from me while I was setting up our picnic. I only looked away for a second." Kids are fast, Blake said, his tone free of judgment. I have a nephew about Lucy's age. He's like lightning when something catches his interest. Amelia relaxed slightly, grateful for his understanding. Do you have children of your own? Blake shook his head. Never found the time or the right person, I suppose. He sipped his coffee, surprised by how good it tasted. This is excellent. I own a small coffee shop in town, Amelia explained. The daily grind, it's nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. Single mom and small business owner, Blake remarked. That can't be easy. A shadow crossed Amelia's face. Lucy's father isn't in the picture. He decided fatherhood wasn't for him before she was even born. Blake felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had abandoned his responsibilities. His loss, he said quietly. She seems like a wonderful little girl. Amelia's expression softened as she glanced at Lucy, who had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from her ordeal. She's everything to me. They talked easily as they finished their coffee. Blake found himself sharing stories about his company, how he'd built it from a small regional shipping business inherited from his father into an international corporation. Amelia listened intently, asking insightful questions that showed she understood more about business than he'd initially assumed. I should probably call my assistant, Blake said reluctantly, checking his water-damaged watch. Let him know I'm still alive. Amelia nodded, a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Of course, you can use our landline. Cell reception is terrible out here. After making his call and arranging for his driver to pick him up, Blake returned to find Amelia gently stroking Lucy's hair as she slept. She'll be okay, he assured her, sensing the lingering worry. Kids are resilient. I know, Amelia replied. I just keep thinking about what could have happened if you hadn't been there. But I was, Blake said simply. When his driver arrived, Blake changed back into his now dry but wrinkled suit. As he prepared to leave, he found himself reluctant to say goodbye. I'd like to check on Lucy tomorrow, if that's okay, he said, surprising himself with the request. Make sure she's doing all right. Amelia looked equally surprised but nodded. We'd like that, or you could stop by the coffee shop. We live above it during the week. The cottage is just our weekend getaway. Blake smiled. The daily grind, right? I'll be there. True to his word, Blake walked into the daily grind the next afternoon. The small coffee shop was charming, with mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air. It was busy but not crowded, with customers working on laptops or engaged in quiet conversation. Amelia was behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail as she steamed milk for a latte. She looked up when the bell above the door jingled, and her face lit up when she saw Blake. You came, she said, handing the finished drink to a customer before wiping her hands on her apron and coming around the counter. I said I would, Blake replied. He was dressed more casually today in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, but still managed to look distinctly out of place among the college students and local shopkeepers that filled the cafe. Lucy's upstairs with my neighbor who watches her when I'm working. She's been talking about you non-stop, the swimming man she calls you, Blake laughed. At least it's better than the wet businessman, Amelia smiled. Can I get you something? On the house, of course. Whatever you recommend, I trust your expertise. While Amelia prepared his drink, Blake took in more details of the shop. Despite its modest appearance, he could tell it was well run. The staff moved efficiently, the display case was artfully arranged with baked goods, and everything was clean and inviting. Amelia returned with a large mug. Our signature drink, it's a maple bourbon latte, no actual bourbon, just the flavor. Blake took a sip and raised his eyebrows appreciatively. This is incredible. Thank you, Amelia said, looking pleased. I developed the recipe myself. You have a real talent, Blake said sincerely. How long have you owned this place? About 5 years now. I bought it when it was failing, renamed it, and slowly turned it around. She glanced around proudly. It's not making me rich, but it's profitable. That's impressive, Blake said. He'd reviewed enough business proposals to recognize good management when he saw it. Amelia checked her watch. My shift ends in 15 minutes. If you have time, maybe you'd like to come up and say hi to Lucy. She'd love to see you. Blake had rearranged his entire afternoon for this visit, pushing meetings and calls to later in the week. I'd love to. The apartment above the coffee shop was small but bright, with large windows overlooking the town's main street. Lucy was sitting at a small table coloring with an elderly woman who Amelia introduced as Mrs. Patel from next door. When Lucy saw Blake, her eyes widened and she slid off her chair, running toward him. "Swimming man," she exclaimed, stopping just short of colliding with his legs. Blake crouched down to her level. "Hi there, Lucy, you're looking much better today." The little girl nodded solemnly. "Mommy says you saved me from being a mermaid." Blake glanced up at Amelia, who shrugged with a small smile, something like that after Mrs. Patel left. The three of them spent the afternoon together. Lucy showed Blake her toys and books, chatting happily as if they were old friends. Amelia prepared a simple dinner, and Blake found himself staying much longer than he'd planned. As Lucy's bedtime approached, she insisted that Blake read her bedtime story. Amelia watched from the doorway as this powerful businessman, who probably negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, patiently did all the character voices for Where the Wild Things Are. When Lucy was finally asleep, Amelia walked Blake to the door. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "You've made her so happy." "I enjoyed it," Blake admitted, "more than any business dinner I've had in recent memory." Amelia laughed. "I'm sure our spaghetti can't compare to the restaurants you're used to." "It was perfect," Blake said, and he meant it. He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to see you both again, perhaps this weekend." Amelia looked surprised but pleased. "We'd like that too." Over the next few weeks, Blake found himself spending more and more time with Amelia and Lucy. He took them to the zoo, helped Lucy build sandcastles at the beach, and even attended her preschool's parent day as Amelia's friend. For the first time in years, Blake felt truly connected to someone. Amelia wasn't impressed by his wealth or status. She valued his kindness, his patience with Lucy, and the conversations they shared late into the evening after Lucy was asleep. Amelia, too, was falling for the man behind the billionaire facade. She loved watching how gentle he was with Lucy, how he listened when Amelia talked about her dreams for the coffee shop, and how he never made her feel less than him despite the vast difference in their financial situations. One evening, as they walked along the lakeshore where they'd first met, Blake took Amelia's hand. "I've been thinking about expanding the daily grind," he said casually. "Have you ever considered opening a second location?" Amelia stopped walking. "Blake, I appreciate the thought, but I don't want your money. That's not what this is about." Blake turned to face her. "I know that. I'm not offering as a billionaire trying to impress you. I'm offering as someone who recognizes a good business opportunity. Your coffee shop has potential, Amelia. It's unique, it's well managed, and your products are exceptional." Amelia studied his face, looking for any sign of condescension or pity, but found only genuine respect. "I've dreamed of expanding," she admitted. But the timing never seemed right with Lucy being so young and the financial risk. "We could start small," Blake suggested. "A second location in the business district. I know the perfect space that's opening up in one of my buildings." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Your building? Convenient." Blake laughed. "Okay, I see how that sounds, but it would be your business entirely. I'd just be an investor silent if you prefer." Amelia was quiet for a moment, considering. "Let me think about it. This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Blake nodded. "Of course, no pressure." They continued walking, hand in hand, as the sun began to set over the lake. Blake found himself thinking about how drastically his life had changed since that fateful day he jumped into the water. Before meeting Amelia and Lucy, his days had been filled with work, and while he'd achieved tremendous success, something had always been missing. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "How lucky I am," Blake replied honestly. "That I happened to be here that day." Amelia squeezed his hand. "We're the lucky ones." The following Saturday, Blake invited Amelia and Lucy to his penthouse for the first time. He'd been hesitant to introduce them to this part of his life, worried it might create a distance between them. But it was time they saw the whole picture. Lucy was immediately entranced by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city below. "We're up in the clouds," she exclaimed, pressing her small hands against the glass. Amelia tried to hide her astonishment at the opulence of his home, but Blake caught her wide-eyed expression as she took in the modern artwork, the designer furniture, and the expansive space. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" he said quietly as Lucy explored the apartment under the watchful eye of Blake's housekeeper, who had taken an immediate liking to the little girl. "It's exactly what I would expect from a billionaire's home," Amelia replied with a small smile. "Beautiful, but not very lived in." Blake looked around with fresh eyes. She was right. Despite the expensive decor, the place lacked the warmth and personality of Amelia's much smaller apartment. "I'm hardly ever here," he admitted. "It's more of a place to sleep between business trips." Amelia ran her hand along the cool marble countertop of his kitchen. No coffee stains or crayon marks, no mismatched mugs or refrigerator artwork. "No," Blake agreed, "no evidence of a life being lived." That evening, after they'd shared a meal prepared by Blake's personal chef, another revelation for Amelia, and put Lucy to bed in the guest room, Blake and Amelia sat on his balcony overlooking the city lights. "I've been thinking about your offer," Amelia said, swirling the wine in her glass. "About expanding the daily grind," Blake waited, giving her space to continue. "I want to do it," she said firmly, "but I want to do it right. A proper business agreement with terms and expectations clearly defined." Blake smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." "And I want to pay you back eventually," Amelia continued. "With interest. This isn't charity, Blake, it's a business partnership." "Agreed," Blake said, impressed by her determination and business acumen. "We'll draw up the paperwork next week." Amelia nodded, satisfied. Then her expression became more serious. "There's something else we need to discuss about us." Blake set down his wine glass, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening. This relationship, whatever it is between us, it's not just about me. Lucy is part of the package. She's already getting attached to you, and if this isn't something serious for you, I need to know now before she gets hurt." Blake took her hand. "Amelia, I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I love spending time with you both. These past few weeks have been the happiest I can remember." Amelia's eyes searched his. "You're sure? Because your world and mine are very different. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize this isn't what you want." Blake moved closer, taking both her hands in his. "What I want is you, Amelia, you and Lucy. The rest is just details we can figure out together." He leaned in and kissed her softly, feeling her respond with equal tenderness. When they finally pulled apart, Amelia's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the feeling. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Blake Walters," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I know I'm falling in love with you, Amelia Barrett," he replied, pulling her closer for another kiss. The next morning, Blake woke to the sound of laughter coming from his kitchen. He found Lucy perched on a stool at the counter, helping Amelia make pancakes. His usually immaculate kitchen was now dusted with flour, and the smell of coffee and maple syrup filled the air. "Good morning," he said, pausing to take in the domestic scene before him. Lucy turned with a wide grin. "Mommy's teaching me to flip pancakes. Is she now?" Blake moved to Amelia's side, placing a kiss on her temple. "And how's that going?" "We've lost 2 to the floor and 1 to the ceiling," Amelia reported with a laugh, pointing upward where, sure enough, a small pancake was stuck to his pristine white ceiling. "A new record," Blake commented, taking a mug of coffee Amelia offered. "Sorry about your ceiling," Amelia said, though she didn't look particularly repentant. Blake shrugged. "It needed some character anyway." Over the following months, Blake's penthouse gradually transformed. Colorful drawings appeared on the refrigerator, a collection of mismatched mugs filled a cabinet, and toys occasionally found their way under the expensive furniture. The pancake eventually fell from the ceiling. but Blake never bothered to clean the slight stain it left behind, considering it their first family memory in his home. Amelia's second coffee shop opened in the lobby of Walter's maritime headquarters, an immediate success with the building's tenants and visitors. True to her word, she insisted on a proper business arrangement, and Blake found himself impressed daily by her business sense and work ethic. 6 months after their first meeting at the lake, Blake took Amelia back to the spot where he'd rescued Lucy. The autumn leaves were turning, creating a kaleidoscope of colors reflected in the water. "Remember that day?" Blake asked as they walked along the shore, their fingers intertwined. "How could I forget?" Amelia replied. "The most terrifying and ultimately the most wonderful day of my life." Blake stopped walking and turned to face her. "I've been thinking a lot about fate lately. How if I hadn't decided to take a rare afternoon off, if I hadn't chosen this particular lake to sit by? If Lucy hadn't decided to chase after a duck when my back was turned," Amelia added with a small smile. Blake nodded. "So many coincidences had to align for us to meet." "Are you saying it was meant to be?" Amelia teased, though her eyes were soft with emotion. "I'm saying I don't want to leave anything else to chance." Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Amelia's breath caught as he dropped to one knee in front of her. "Amelia Barrett, you and Lucy have completely changed my life. You've shown me what really matters, what true success looks like." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." Blake slid the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her deeply as the autumn breeze swirled leaves around them. That evening, they told Lucy the news over dinner at Amelia's apartment. The little girl's reaction wasn't what either of them expected. "Does this mean you'll be my daddy now?" Lucy asked Blake directly, her small face serious. Blake glanced at Amelia, who nodded encouragingly, then turned back to Lucy. "I would be honored to be your daddy, Lucy." "If that's okay with you." Lucy considered this for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "It's okay, but you have to promise not to leave like my other daddy did." Blake felt his heart constrict at her words. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. "Lucy, I promise you with all my heart that I will never leave you or your mommy. We're going to be a family, and families stick together." Lucy studied his face, then broke into a wide smile. "Okay, can I be the flower girl at your wedding?" Blake laughed, relief washing over him. "Absolutely. The most important flower girl in the world." They were married the following spring at Lake Serenity, with Lucy proudly scattering rose petals down the aisle before Amelia appeared in a simple but elegant lace gown. The ceremony was small, with only close friends and family in attendance, including Blake's board of directors, who had never seen their CEO so visibly happy. As they exchanged vows under an arch of wildflowers, with the lake shimmering behind them, Blake couldn't help but marvel at how completely his life had changed. Once focused solely on building his empire, he now knew that true wealth was measured in moments like these, in Amelia's loving gaze, in Lucy's joyful laughter, in the family they were creating together. At the reception, Blake's best friend and COO, David, raised his glass for a toast. To Blake and Amelia, proof that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought, only found when you least expect them. 2 years later, Amelia gave birth to their son, Benjamin, completing their family. The daily grind had expanded to 5 locations across the city, all successful under Amelia's careful management. Blake had restructured his company to allow him more time at home, discovering that balance made him not only happier but more effective when he was working. On Lucy's 7th birthday, they returned once more to the lake where it all began. As Blake watched his daughter, for she was his daughter in every way that mattered, teaching her little brother how to skip stones across the water, with Amelia by his side, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Penny for your thoughts," Amelia said, leaning against his shoulder. "Just thinking about that day," Blake replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "How one split-second decision changed everything." Amelia looked up at him, her green eyes still capable of taking his breath away. You jumped into a lake to save a child. And found the love of my life, Blake finished, bending to kiss her softly. Best dive I ever made, Amelia laughed against his lips. And here I thought you were just showing off, ruining that expensive suit to impress a girl. Blake pulled her closer, watching as Lucy successfully taught Benjamin to throw a pebble that skipped 3 times before sinking. If I'd known you were waiting for me on that shore, I'd have jumped in 1,000 times. Well, thank goodness once was enough, Amelia said. Our story is perfect just the way it is. Blake couldn't agree more. From billionaire workaholic to devoted husband and father, his journey had been unexpected but infinitely rewarding. As the sun began to set over Lake Serenity, casting golden light across his family's happy faces, Blake Walters knew with absolute certainty that he had found something far more valuable than all his business success. He had found his heart's true home.